I felt it. I just remember the teacher being, I just don't think this is for you. I just remember being like, no, that's not, just no, that's not true. I just know if I could learn how to do it, I will do it. And I don't really know where that came from. I just felt so adamant that she was wrong.
Say to her when she might have thought she wasn't necessarily clever enough or enough to perhaps study to be physio? What do you think you would tell her or somebody else in that situation?
I would love to go back and be like, you're just good enough. You can do it. I struggled with a lot of confidence. I never had anybody telling me that I was good at something. If you had somebody in your corner that could be, you got this, you can do it.
Today's guest has gone from waitressing with just a couple of GCSEs to a senior NHS physio leading teams in London, launching her own online practice and becoming self-employed, and now training as a sonographer. It's a story of resilience, taking risks, and never accepting no as the final answer. In this episode, we explore the highs, the lows, and the lessons of carving your own path, even when the system says you can't. Welcome to the podcast, Yasmin.
Hi.
So let's jump back into the early stages of your schooling. You struggled at school, left with a couple of GCSEs, and at 22, you were working as a waitress. Yet we fast forward a few years, gone back to night school, smashed your GCSEs, and ended up with a first-class honours in physiotherapy. What was the turning point in that, or what made you change?
Oh, I think if we take it all the way back to when I was waitressing and I was in Bristol, I think a lot of my friends, they'd left Bristol, they'd got their GCSEs, they'd done their A-levels and they'd made it to uni. And I kind of had that realization at about 22, 23 that I'd been left behind a little bit. And that felt really horrible. I was waitressing, and with that came a lot of going out and being within that sort of like nightlife scene. And I guess I felt quite depressed. And I think it was at that point I realized that, something had to change, because if I kept myself in this cycle of doing this and working late, and it was kind of almost getting to a bit about your rock bottom, or just feeling like, no, I can't live like this anymore.
Yeah, and you even got rejected from an access course because they didn't think you'd actually pass. How did you deal with that setback?
Yeah, that was an interesting story. So I didn't get my maths GCSE when I left school, and to get into the access course, I needed to get that. So I applied for the access course, but I hadn't got the GCSE yet, but that was in the process, and I was going to be starting my lessons and going through that. But I had to take this little like mini exam to see if I would be able to maybe pass the GCSE, and I failed it. And I just remember the teacher being like, I just don't think this is for you. I think maybe you need to maybe pick something different, and the science and the maths isn't really going to come. And I just remember being like, no, that's not true. I just know if I could like learn how to do it, I will do it. And I don't really know where that came from. I just felt so adamant that she was wrong. And luckily there was another course in Bristol at a different college, and I got through that one and I got the GCSE.
Brilliant. And then you go on and smash physiotherapy and get a first-class honours.
Yeah.
Like, what was that like going through that?
Incredible, really. I remember finding it really hard at first, uni, because some people had done another undergrad before they'd done it, and everyone seemed really confident in what they were doing and writing essays and that kind of thing. I think I got 36% or something on my first essay and did quite badly, and then was like, oh God, I need to work really hard. And I did work really hard at uni. Like I didn't do a lot of the fun stuff and going out. I spent all of my days in just learning and studying. And I kind of felt like I had to show people that I could do better. And not only just for other people, but for myself as well. Because I think I'd lost a lot of confidence on that journey, definitely.
Definitely. And I dare say as well, when you were saying in the waitressing, you probably had your time of going out in that scene. So actually, if you went to university a little bit more mature than some of the younger students, you're like, actually, I'm choosing to do this because I know the end goal. And obviously, when you left university, you chose to go straight into musculoskeletal physiotherapy instead of the traditional rotations. What sort of decision like for you?
I just knew that's what I had to do.
Yeah.
I remember at uni, we would have different placements that we would go on, and some of them would be like on a stroke ward, or you might do an elderly rehab ward. And I had an MSK placement, which is the musculoskeletal physio. And I just loved every minute of it. And I was just thought that is where I need to be. And I think maybe being a slightly older student, like I think when I left uni, I must have been about 27, or maybe a bit later, but I felt almost like I didn't have the time to do the other stuff. And I felt like that probably ever since I've left uni, like, oh, I don't have time to hang around and do this. I got to keep going, keep moving forwards. But yeah,
Brilliant. Bit like a quarter life crisis.
yeah, literally.
And then when you got into the NHS and you sort of, what was your career path like that through there?
So, yeah, so I got into the NHS and I had this static MSK role. And yeah, I think I always had that drive that I just needed to keep progressing. I think living in London at the time as well, like I didn't have a lot of money. Progressing through the bands of a physio is really important so you can be paid more.
Yes.
So that was definitely a big driver for me. And so I was constantly trying to think, oh, can I quit this job and start a new one and find something else? Because I often find in the NHS, sometimes actually it's better to quit a job and find another one within the NHS to actually move up, because it's harder when you're actually in somewhere because there's a lot of
Yeah.
competition. But yeah, I think that was kind of my journey of always just trying to progress. And yeah, I think I made it to a senior physio and then a band 7 physio quite quickly. And I think I just did that by, I would always just ask people if I could do things. I would always do the extra CPD. I would always do the extra courses and the things that other people wouldn't do. And maybe at that point, I don't think I was the best physio, but I was certainly the physio that would do everything. And that is, I think, the thing that gets you the jobs as well. When you can say, I've done this, 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 and this, there might be somebody that's maybe more technical or skilled because they've been doing it a lot longer. But actually, the person that gets the job is someone that's got the things on their CV. So yeah, that's definitely something I learned quite quickly.
Yeah, and I dare I say as well, within London, you can probably move from different hospitals, and you ended up being at quite a big trauma hospital. What
Yeah.
was that like? Was there a lot of excitement, a bit of fear, or a bit of both, do you think?
It was a big jump. So I'd gone from a very small trust in Greenwich, and I'd ended up at King's College Hospital in London, which is a big trauma centre. And yeah, it was exciting when I first started going. It was a huge team, and yeah, I learned a lot there, like some really excellent physios. And yeah, it was hard though, because the population that seek the service can be challenging, and it's busy, huge waiting lists, and often, that comes with sort of unhappy patients when, they struggle to come and actually see a physio because of the waiting list is so long. So yeah, definitely quite challenging.
Challenging. I imagine by showing willingness in the early part of your career has probably allowed you to deal with some of those things because you would naturally have gone above and beyond. You've learnt a bit more here. You're willing to be taken under the wing of somebody else that might have a skill set that you want to develop. Like you said, you weren't necessarily the best to start with, but by having, I suppose, dropping that ego and go, I'm just here willing to learn. Here's my scope of practice, and I just want to make it slightly bigger, or I want to go slightly deeper into my scope of practice. And then obviously you mentioned there that you dealt with a wide range of people coming in, sometimes obviously in a lot of discomfort, perhaps annoyed at the long waiting lists. We see a lot of people, or the misconceptions that perhaps the NHS physios are seen through perhaps a tinted lens. But you've also probably have said already you've worked with some of the best physios you've probably worked with. Is there something wrong with perhaps the system, or is there a big myth that it's obviously a very good profession that you love, but how does it sort of need to clear up?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's so hard in the NHS. I think imagining it as a patient, you might go to your GP and you say, I've got a knee pain, and then you might be referred to a physio that's kind of your first point of contact, and they are the kind of people that might just give you a sheet of paper and hope that a couple of exercises might get you better. And in a lot of cases, somebody might see those exercises, do them, and get better. But then obviously for a lot of people, that's not how it works, and it needs to be more individualized. So then we have that horrible, people just think that that's what physios do. You get that sheet of exercises, and yeah, and no one gets better. And so that, I think, is one big misconception. But I think when you actually get in to see a physio in the NHS, in the MSK service, that the journey should be different. I often found that the physios that I work with in the NHS, you have to do so much study and CPD, and you get supervision. It's not always like that in private practice. You can get away with, if you wanted to, maybe not doing any extra study and just learning what you learned at uni, and maybe you might not be as knowledgeable or be up to date on the evidence base. So I think often, yeah, the physios in the NHS have that high evidence based. And yeah, in private practice, you have to go the extra mile to do it, and often fund it all yourself as well.
Finding that balance. And what was that moment? When was a moment that you perhaps realised that you needed to step away from the NHS and do something slightly differently and build into your own business that you are now?
I think I had worked through COVID, and that had been challenging. I had done some sort of online clinics at home, which were just awful and boring and terrible, and nobody wanted that. And it was very depressing for me. And so then I asked to be redeployed, and I got redeployed into like some COVID wards and worked there, and was just busy, busy, busy. And that it was good to be busy at that point. That's what I wanted. And then I had, after kind of COVID had finished, I had all these ideas of what I wanted to do. And so I started doing evenings and weekends in a private practice. And I found that quite exciting. I was seeing athletes and runners, CrossFitters, dancers, and everybody was, they were coming out of COVID, they were all getting injured, and they really was so pumped to get better and do the work. And so it was definitely a different set of patients that I was working with, and I found that quite exciting. So I had asked my sort of team lead manager if I could drop some hours so that I could still keep up my NHS clinic, because I loved it and I really believe and love the NHS. They weren't able to accommodate that, basically. And I think that can be a problem in the NHS, the lack of flexibility that I felt within that I wasn't able to kind of progress as myself. It had to be within the limits of where the NHS thought I could be, I guess. And there's always a ceiling with that, which is going to be difficult when you're somebody that wants to kind of push always. At that point, when they said no, I said, well, I'm leaving. And so I left.
Yeah, and you knew something obviously was in you then, even from your early start. You knew your gut feeling somewhere was like, right, I know I need to do something. I've messed around. I'm now coming in to learn. And again, you're like, actually, I need to progress. Trust my gut feeling. And now you're like, I've given you opportunity. It's not quite right. Okay, I'll take it my own, and off we go. And you mentioned you've come from sort of a working class background where sort of perhaps expectations for career wasn't necessarily particularly high. What do you think that took mentally or emotionally to break through that and carve your own path to where you are now? Were there moments of it might not work?
Yeah, I think, yeah, my family they were never really pushing education or that on me. They just really wanted me to be happy. And that was, do whatever you want to do and we'll just watch you do it. And so, yeah, I've never really had that pressure to kind of, yeah, either go to uni or to get a certain job. But I think what I kind of noticed on my journey when I sort of decided I wanted to be a physio, and I started seeing that actually if you put effort into something, you can get that reward back, which I'd never really had before, because at school I didn't see that, because I didn't get the GCSEs, or I didn't get those kind of reward bits. And then when I started to see that actually, if I do that, if I take this course, if I study hard for something, then the reward is that I move forwards. I kind of just, yeah, kind of got a bit obsessed and addicted to that, I think. And it's almost like a little bit of a drug. I don't know if when you see things start to work in your favor when you work hard, it's really hard to kind of not keep pushing on with that and seeing what your limit is.
It's a bit like, I suppose, being in flow, as they talk about
Mm.
it, is once you're on the river or somebody spoke to me about an analogy of water. Water is always flowing.
Mm.
Sometimes it's slower, Sometimes it's faster, sometimes you go through rapids. And I think once you get into a nice place where you discover which perhaps water course you would like to be in,
Mm,
you can then change and you're actually going with the flow rather than trying to go upstream. Things
yeah.
go a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And you've
Great.
mentioned earlier your approach is always to ask more. Could you share a couple of times where that mindset's really opened up the next door for you?
I think, yeah, one of the big ones for me was finding a mentor quite early on. Like I found a physio when I worked in my first NHS job, and his name's Benoit Matthews, and he was like the advanced practitioner at work. Everyone just thought he was great. He was really interested in hips, and he would run all these courses. And I kind of thought, I want to do that one day. So I kind of bullied him into, I think, probably mentoring me at one point, because I would always just ask him questions and, ask him, can I work for you? Can I work in your private clinic? And I remember him being like, you've just graduated. You can't come to this private clinic. You're not good enough. But he would give me these random opportunities like, why don't you come along to this course for free? You seem really interested. And I would just attend. And so he then sort of became my mentor through that, and really probably he still is. Really, I'll always ask him questions, and that has been a big thing for me.
Wow.
I think just seeking that mentorship and always asking, can I do more? Can I do the next thing from somebody that's already there, maybe?
Yeah, learning from the people who have already treaded the path to
Yeah.
then sort of pick that up. And I think that sort of really accelerates your learning because you
Yeah.
can actually learn it in a textbook, but how do you apply it? I think
Yeah.
there's a big transition that you can be probably very technically gifted,
Mm,
but how do you translate that to perhaps Mrs. Jones that's 55 years old with
yeah.
very little knowledge,
Yeah.
or perhaps is very worried? That there's that transition, isn't it? And if you can then learn from somebody like that, I'd imagine there's a lot of extra soft skills
Yeah.
that you probably pick up because he's been so much further along in the pathway
Yeah.
that you can go.
Absolutely. And I think is even just, I remember another mentor saying, I think it was when I had my first private practice job, and I'd been there for 6 months, and they said, you should be asked to be paid more by now. And it hadn't even occurred to me that I could ask, because in the NHS you can't ask for a pay rise. You go on a sort of a banding, and they tell you when you can have your pay rise. But I thought, oh, I can ask. That's so interesting. And I booked a meeting with the clinic owner and said, can I have a pay rise? I didn't quite think I even deserved it. And he was like, and I was like, oh, that was easy. And that's then, I guess, something that you kind of learn from other people.
Yeah, brilliant. So always ask. They
Yeah.
can always say no
Yeah,
rather than you assuming they're going to say no, isn't it?
exactly.
And can we dive into that sort of the transition from having the ability to hand in your notice at the NHS because you realised the career path wasn't there. The buzz that you sounded like you got from working in private practice where you probably had willing patients, I want to get back to that sport. I want to get back to doing that thing. What were those moments like, probably going from a clinician into transitioning into a business owner or that self-employed role?
Mm. It was interesting. There were some concerns there. I remember thinking, the pension, really worried about that. Everyone talks about the pension in the NHS. And also just like the stability. I didn't have anybody that might be able to, if I can't pay my rent, pay it for me. So I was quite nervous about that. But I had kind of slowly started like thinking this kind of plan was going to happen. And I'd sort of set up an online clinic before I kind of got to my full private role and left completely. So I'd set up an Instagram, and I had started having kind of interest in what I was doing from patients that were kind of contacting me, people that were wanting to do I did a bit of health coaching with these patients and strength and conditioning and that kind of thing. And so I could already see oh, maybe this could be a thing. If I could just have a bit more time to do it, I could perhaps make it into something. And so I think that was like a good step, knowing that I would be okay. I think I didn't have everything in place when I first started doing it. I remember, I didn't have an accountant. Patients would book into my diary and the system wasn't very good. And I didn't have the right forms to send out to people. And I kind of just built, I just just started and then it all started falling into place. I didn't think about it hugely beforehand, which maybe someone might do. It might be a good thing to sit down and think, actually, how is this going to work? But I just kind of did trial and error sort of along the way. Oh, does this work? Does that work? And then I think that's what gave me the confidence when I started seeing it working.
Which is fascinating. So you wonder how many people perhaps would think about having their dream job or moving from a safe job, as you said, the NHS, good pension, perhaps not great pay, but regular pay. They're not going to perhaps go bust.
Mm.
So you've got a little bit of security. What would you say to somebody who's thinking about starting their own thing? What do you think you would say to them to make that sort of transition like you've done? Not necessarily into physiotherapy, but they might be in banking and want to go into jewelry making or something.
I think just do it and don't overthink it would be my main thing. I think it's really easy when you've got an idea that's quite exciting to get stuck on the idea, and just saying, oh, it could be this, and you worry too much about all the little things. And actually, it's often the little things that hold you up. And if you just actually get started and just go, that's when I think you'll end up like a little bit like me. It all just falls into place because I think, I've watched friends and people that have tried to kind of set up their own businesses, and they always talk about this big idea that they have, but the big idea just stays an idea and they never quite are able to make their way out of the idea phase.
I suppose, what is it? Perfection, paralysis by perfection,
Yeah,
where you
exactly.
think, I've got to have all of that. Whereas I think, like you're saying there, if you were conscientious but also being aware of, okay, this is how I set up now. Does it work? No, it doesn't. I can tweak it. Okay, that's better, but I think I can do it again, which is pretty much your path that you've gone is, who's that mentor I can go and speak to? That person said, no, I can't do that. But if I just learn this thing, I can then deliver it. And I think that's so powerful. And I think if you're falling forwards, you're always making some form of momentum forwards rather than trying to fall backwards.
Yeah, absolutely. I was always asking for feedback from my patients, my clients, like, does this work? How is it on your side? Some of the patients that I still have now are from back in that time, and they don't see me for that injury anymore, but they see me for, I don't know, health coaching or strength and conditioning programs. And I built up such a trust with them, because I think I was just open and honest about where I was. And it was kind of like a team effort at right at the beginning.
Yeah. I suppose you were almost mentoring them and they were mentoring you, like you were with the gentleman in the NHS you were talking about, saying, actually, can you come along to this? Can you see if this works? Can you give me some feedback? How did it? Well, no, I didn't quite enjoy that bit. Right. Okay. So it sounds like there's a lot of things going on with you. Like you got your online practice, you got your in-person clinic as well. Like there's a lot there, but you're studying to be a sonographer. What was the sort of the next thing? Because obviously you said in NHS, you sort of almost had all the evidence base to keep up with. In private practice, you've almost got to go and search that. What was the curiosity around becoming sonographer?
I think, yeah, I guess in an MSK clinic where you're seeing patients that are, they're outpatients, they come in, they have an injury, and they might have had that injury 3 weeks ago, and they've got a knee pain, let's say. What I found really exciting about sonography is that you can have that patient come into clinic and you would be able to diagnose their problem perhaps just in that one session. You're able to give that feedback at that point of care. And I think that is so important for patients. I think that might be where MSK clinicians are sort of heading as well. So for me, I wanted to get in front of that. A lot of people want to do that course because a lot of people want that, if you get injured, you want to know what's going on and when can you get back to football? When can you get back to sports? And if you can be a little bit more precise, then I think that's hugely helpful for patients. And it's also exciting for me. I'm like, okay, no, that is the thing I thought it would be.
Yeah, cool. And I suppose also there's a lot of publicity around, oh, I've gone to the doctors, I think I need an X-ray. Oh, I think I need an MRI scan. So there's almost this sort of, the general population is, I need to see what's going on.
Mm,
And nowadays with social media, we can spy on people and see what's going on. We can go on YouTube and look what's going on. I wonder whether there's an unspoken thing that if I can see something, which obviously with
mm,
ultrasound, you can then see something, whether that will play into the psyche
mm.
of the patients, which actually might make them feel better just because somebody's having a look inside their knee, for example. There must be elements of that we perhaps can't quantify.
Yeah, reassurance is going to play a huge part in that. Yeah, if you can show somebody that actually, what you've got there is a tendinopathy, and then you can give someone perhaps a time frame, or you can give somebody just, this is okay, you're going to be fine. It's going to hurt, and you're going to have to do some rehab, but we can see why it hurts. That can hugely help somebody and their recovery. And I think you don't always need scans to get better. And there is that thing of it's often harder to get them in the NHS. But I think as sonography becomes more popular again, it's much cheaper. It's easier for people to access, and people are getting that in a NHS service as well. And that, you're being able to get that reassurance there as well.
Which is nice. And how, with all of that you've got going on, because I'd imagine studying to be a sonographer is not a 2-hour course to do. How do you stop yourself burning out with all your online practice, all your in-person stuff?
Yeah.
Obviously your personal life that goes on around that as well, or partner or husband or whatever that goes in that, as well as learning. How do you find that sort of balance without burning out?
I think you definitely go through phases with it. I don't think I could tell you that I don't manage burnout, because I've definitely had phases where I feel really burnt out. And I know that's not healthy, but I often see it as, I think, I'm going to have these phases in my life of where I'm going to, be working much harder. And then phases where, I'm hopefully going to be working a little less hard. And when my course is finished in September, I'm really hoping that I will be working a little less hard, because that study element's going to go for a little bit until I decide to do something else. But I'd like to give it a few months before I pick up something else. I think burnout, it is something that, particularly since COVID, as I've started working harder, that I have had to manage. And in private practice, I think because there's often not a limit, if I want to see somebody, I can work the extra hour, I can do the extra thing. And you really have to work on pulling yourself back. And that's the hardest thing, especially when you're excited and you love your job. Where is your limits? But things I have put into place are trying to, any kind of work calls on the weekend, I archive everybody to do with work, and that goes into one folder so I don't see any messages, and that usually helps me. And I try and be off social media on the weekend, even if it's just for one day on a Sunday, because social media is my work as well.
Yeah.
And I also have therapy, which I find is helpful, talking therapies and just trying to exercise and things like that. I think it's definitely up and down, and I haven't quite found the answer to managing burnout yet. But
It's finding, I suppose, having your barriers or boundaries, isn't
yeah.
it? And I can't remember where I heard it. It was really interesting. And they were talking about the grass is always greener on the other side. And they said it may look greener on the other side, but you don't know what's growing underneath it. But you're like, actually, yeah, if you're really clear on where your boundaries are, it's a lot easier to know if somebody else is trying to sneak in over the garden fence and put something in your garden, to be able
Yeah.
to clear it out, which is quite nice. And as you said there, there seems to be, mentioned social media as well, there seems to be a lot of pressure to have it all together.
Mm.
If you could sit down with like your 16-year-old self or your 22-year-old self, what would be one thought or one thing you could perhaps say to her when she might have thought she wasn't necessarily clever enough or enough to perhaps study to be physio? What do you think you would tell her or somebody else in that situation?
I just think I would love to go back and be like, you're just good enough. You can do it. I struggled with a lot of confidence. I never had anybody telling me that I was good at something. So I think if you had somebody in your corner that could be, you got this, you can do it, that would be, yeah, what I would say.
I mean, like you say, finding that mentor early on in your career, and probably now having different people in your private clinics that you can perhaps draw on to and sort of say, oh, I'll have a look at this, or, oh, you're doing that course. That sounds quite nice. Okay, brilliant. And let's move on. What was the thing that started you? Like, obviously you did a bit of beauty therapy or stuff in the past. Transitioning into physiotherapy, was there something that you suddenly thought, oh, wow, that's what I want to do?
Um, I must have been about 16, and my dad had an accident. So he was a cyclist, and he was knocked off his bike, and he had multiple injuries. He was off work for what felt like years. I'm not sure it was that long. He had a lot of injuries. I think he had an ACL injury. hip injury, back injury, broken ribs, elbow, everything. It was all.
Wow.
And so I had gone to some physio with Dad and just kind of gone along to that appointment just to see what he was up to, because he was sort of telling me about it. It sounded interesting. And I just kind of remember the physio. It was an NHS physio in Bristol. And she was just so incredible. The appointment was for Dad's back, and she was so reassuring, and she just explained everything step by step of like what was going on with Dad's back, like why they thought this was kind of happening and why he was still getting pain. And really just like he left with a plan of what was, what he could do to get it better. And just seeing like my dad leave that appointment, just feeling like just hopeful, I think was really special. And that sort of made me think, okay, well, I want to do that. She's just made us both feel really good. And that's where I kind of thought, okay, want to do physio. Like, how am I going to get there? And then I kind of thought it's going to be hard because I don't have any of the stuff you need to get started, but let's get started.
Yeah, I had a burning ambition then and had that inner confidence from somewhere. And if we circle back to sort of having that confidence and going then from NHS into your own practice, you said obviously you've learned it as you've gone along, as in refined your process. Do you think by actually starting something perhaps with a little bit of confidence, you've then got a little bit of feedback, a little bit of, I suppose, reward from doing it, not necessarily financially, but Mr. Jones, who's can go back to CrossFit and he's now got a PB at something.
Mm.
Do you think by doing more, your confidence has actually grown, not necessarily as a clinician, but as a business owner?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. You kind of realize that, I guess you get to a certain point and you start to think you can always progress. There's always that you can keep moving that ceiling. Just knowing that, yeah, there's so much further you could go, or different avenues or routes that you could go. And I always have all these kind of big ideas of what I want to do and where I might go. And that is very exciting.
Very exciting. And you imagine you've obviously been working for a number of years now. There's got to be perhaps some funny stories or unexpected things that patients perhaps might have done, or colleagues that might have done. Obviously, don't mention any names to get them in trouble or anything like that. What are some of the funny things that you think you can remember over your experience, or anything that stands out for you?
I don't know about funny. I mean, yeah, I guess you're always working with like different people. And so you might, and you meet people and you're like, wow, never met anyone like you before. This is really fun. And so quite often, like I would have days in clinic where you just meet really wonderful, interesting people. And that is, really lovely. Your day is always different. But not any kind of particular like funny or embarrassing moment. But there are a few patients that like I just always remember. I had one patient and he had like a hamstring. He wasn't sure whether it was back or hamstring injury, and he was a runner and he'd been running like his whole life, and he was in his 70s. And I just remember he came in with the worst pair of running shoes I've ever seen. Like, really, I was like, I don't know
Like
how you run it.
plimsolls from like PPE back in the 90s or something.
Yeah, but he'd always run in these shoes. And yeah, and I just remember that we managed to kind of get down to the bottom of his injury. It was his hamstring, and we had managed to like improve his symptoms with rehab, and he had got back to running. And that was just, I don't know, just remember that, because I remember him being like, everyone's telling me that it's this, and I just don't believe it's that. And I know that my body can do this and can run. I've done it always, and I'm built to do this. And just being able to help him overcome that, and just in 3 or 4 sessions I think we had in the NHS every 6 or 8 weeks, I think it was, and he managed to and he got better, and he got back to running. And I just remember how it was affecting him so much before, and
Yeah.
watching him kind of get back to things. It was incredible.
Well, then maybe you were that person that you went to see with your dad, but for him,
That
to
would be nice.
reassure him, give him the confidence to go, which is amazing. And that's some of the stuff that perhaps people don't really understand, is how rewarding it can actually be when you have somebody that comes in a right pickle, and very swiftly you can change that. And have you noticed that being an online physio, there's a little bit of hesitation that people think, you've got to touch me, I need physical touch, or I need palpation or something like that? Have you found the transition that people prefer in person, or they are okay with online?
I think it should. I definitely think it's personal preference as well. I think if you've got an injury that you have so much anxiety about, that you're concerned about, sometimes that physical touch is so important, which is why I would never not do that as well, because somebody to physically look at you can be really important. We mentioned that with the sonography as well. But there are those patients, that often younger patients, athletes, that have a really good understanding of their body and where they're at with their injury. And they maybe even come to you saying, hey, I've got runner's knee. I know what this is. What do I do? And they just want you to kind of talk them through it and help them with a rehab plan. And so those are the patients that I think are perfect for online therapy. And you can do so much, like full assessment of an injury online. You can set really great objective measures and make an excellent plan and really get someone better. And I have hundreds of patients that I've got better through online physio. I think I'm also someone that really believes that the physical touch element is important. So I always, people that reach out for online physio, I don't push that on anyone. They reach out to me. I think they just hear about how I've maybe got their friend better, or they've heard about me from a running club or something like that. And then they think, oh, I've got a friend and it's worked for them. And that's kind of how it works.
How it was.
Yeah.
Wow. It's a fascinating journey, I think, what you've had. I mean, it's a brilliant example of setting your own standards. I'm not going to give in. I'm going to keep going. Obviously, not letting the grades stop you in the school system or define what you can achieve. Obviously, then getting into your waitressing days, transitioning into the NHS, now coming out on your own. It's, I suppose, like a recovery that you might see in clinic. It's a powerful reminder that progress isn't necessarily linear as such. If you have to leave the listeners with one message from your story, what would it be?
I think it's you can do it. Just need to find a way. I think my story shows that, you can be in a position where you feel like you're super unconfident, you're not academic, and you feel like you're maybe not good enough. And I think my story shows that you can start again, no matter what age, no matter where you are in your life, that if you just, make a start, I think maybe seek a bit of mentorship along the way. You can pretty much do anything. I'm a big believer that, we do have it within us to do anything that we want to, or we can learn anything that we want to if you put the time in.
Yeah, trust your gut then, isn't it? Have
Yeah.
that feeling. And I suppose start small, get a little bit of feedback, and then build on that sort of, I suppose, almost imperfection. Cool. And if people have been inspired by your journey or have an injury that thinks you can really help them, how can they get hold of you, or how can they find you?
So I have an Instagram, which is the fitness physio. And you can email me. So I'm Yasmin at thefitnessphysio.com. I do online appointments. And then also I have a clinic in London that I work out of as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'll make sure they're in the show notes, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much.
Be a part of 360 Life Stories. Subscribe and join our emailing list to get exclusive insights, episode highlights, and behind-the-scenes stories straight to your inbox.